Hello, everyone. This is Francisca Blanc with Utah Housing Coalition. Thank you so much for registering today for our monthly meeting. Um, people are, we have right now 40 people in attendance, and I know there are more coming. So what we're going to present today, we're going to provide a legislative update from the session that ended on March 5th. That will be the first half an hour, and the other half an hour we will have Kenwin Derby from West Ed and Chris Giangreco from United Way of Salt Lake giving us a presentation on the research they have done on school mobility. So that was it's very good information for us to have. We will start with our Executive Director, Tara Rollins, giving you all a welcome.
Welcome, everyone. It's been a while since we've been together, and hopefully in a couple more months we'll be face to face if we all behave, right? We've had quite a year, and we've also had a lot of we have a lot of great things to celebrate in terms of housing people can afford and the resources that are coming to our state in the past for rental assistance, our future rental assistance, as well as bills that are being put forward by the federal government and bring in additional funds for infrastructure, and infrastructure is housing, correct? So I think there's a lot of opportunities here to, as I've always said, we tend to make the same shoe over and over and over again because we don't get any new supplies. And so I'm seeing some new shoes being able to be made. So welcome, everyone, and I hope you enjoy our meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. And if you have any questions for the presenters, we have some time set aside at the end of each presentation to answer questions. You can place your questions in the chat. And so I will, three people are going to do this legislative update. It will be myself, Tara Rollins, and Ashley Spada for Mirabelli. And I think all of you know Ashley by now. So the session, ended on March 5th, and it was weird because was primarily online. I had to go to Capitol to co-present on two bills only twice, and I felt very safe. I think they did an awesome job. Tara had to go also twice. And, we had a really good outcomes considering how everything was taking place, and that we could not do the traditional, wait in the lobby and discuss with legislators and other advocates the issues that we care about. So with that being said, I will start with House Bill 68, which was sponsored by Representative Marsha Judkins. We call it Truth and Renting because that was the purpose of the bill. This is something that we worked on last year, and it died in the last 15 minutes of the last evening of the session. So Representative Judkins came back this year with a bill in the same format as was in the last stages last year. And I have to say that there are still some concerns from the Utah Apartment Association, and we were able to have, conversations and negotiations. And finally, the bill that passed was something that everybody received something with nobody what they wanted 100%, but this is a big win for the renters. So effective May 5th, when a renter goes to apply for a rent, the landlord has to tell them all of the monthly expenses that are required to pay, including rent, fees, utilities, and so forth. If this information is not provided to the renter prior to the application and they find out about it when they have to sign the lease, the renter can ask if they realize they cannot afford all of the additional fees, they have the right to ask the landlord for their money back, such as, security deposit or whatever money was exchanged prior to signing the lease. And then there's kind of a time frame, and we will provide more detailed information about this in our next newsletter, which we're going to come out soon. And this bill did not have any kind of appropriations. The next bill that was landlord-tenant related was House Bill 268, Utah Fit Premises Act amendments. This bill was started and sponsored by Representative Bennion. Um, and representative wanted to do something to address privacy issues that renters were facing. So the bill just asks simply, if the maintenance or the manager need to enter the rental unit, they need to give them a 24-hour notice unless was an emergency, such as flooding or, other big issues that they need to come in and right away. It made it out of the House committee, but unfortunately it died on the House floor. And we hope that this is something that it can be further discussed in the future. The last bill that we were watching, we did not push for it, but we were watching, was House Bill 352, the state identification amendments. And it basically says if a homeless person needs to get their ID, all fees are waived. And I want to thank the groups who work for this bill because this is a really, really good thing. I will ask Ashley to present on the next bills, as she, on her position, she works with the Utah Commission on Housing Affordability, but she also represents a number of cities in Salt Lake City and cities that care quite a bit about affordable housing. Ashley, you're on.
First of all, thank you for having me. I'll go through about 4 different bills, run through them pretty quickly, and then if there's questions, you can just let me know. I'll start with HB 82, which was the single family home modifications, which is the ADU bill. Representative Ray Ward in the House and Senator Andrigg in the Senate. So what this bill does is it basically allows internal ADUs to be a permitted use throughout primarily residential zones. Some of the negotiations for cities were that there are a few things that the cities still can regulate or create some ground rules. So a city can still require a parking, off-street parking, require that there's not 2 different meters for electrical, things like that. Mandate that you can't use this ADU for short-term rental. So it has to be a long-term rental, and the owner has to live in the home. The other thing that a city can do is a city can restrict up to 25% of their residential areas for where these ADUs are not allowed. So, it's a pretty big change coming statewide. The other interesting thing that it does is it creates a grant program of up to, I believe it's $500,000. And you can do a loan program. It's a 2-year loan program. So a homeowner could get us a low interest rate loan to modify their basement or whatever internally to allow the home to be rented out to an individual. The only restriction on that is that the rent has to be at an 80% AMI of the area. HB 347. So this is Representative Steve Elison, and again, Senator Andrigg, Homeless Services Amendments. So this bill recreates or restructures how we're going to deal with homeless services throughout the state. It creates a new position within the Governor's Office of Budget Management, the homeless coordinator. And then there's going to be the homelessness office, the actual term, but there's going to be an office within Department of Workforce Services that will then, provide support to this new coordinator. Also part of the structure, there currently exists the statewide homeless coordinating committee. That's going to transition to the Utah Homeless Council. It's going to largely remain the same, but there's going to be more philanthropic, there's going to be providers, all of the cities that host resource centers are going to be on there. There's also going to be executive directors or designees from departments throughout the state, Health and Human Services, Department of Corrections, Education, And so the council and the new coordinator are going to work coordinated in and together to really start to restructure how our homeless services are provided. There's the appropriation of, about $230,000 ongoing for the cost of this, of the new coordinator position in the new office. There was also an additional appropriation, I believe, up to $15 million for homelessness. The appropriations go into effect May 5th, but the bill does not go into effect until July 1, which is the new fiscal year. So, you're going to see that new appointed position of the homeless coordinator this summer. The other bills I'll talk about is SB 164. So this is the Affordable Housing Amendment. So this was the bill that came out of the Housing Commission. It was largely slimmed down by the end, but the biggest provisions that remained in there, there's three things. So four things. So a city or municipality can grant housing for a development project as long as, I believe it's 20% of the units are affordable and they're at that 50% AMI or lower. There's going to be a new grant program. The unfortunate thing is hopefully our intention was for it to be ongoing, but we only could secure one time. But this is for the expanded statewide mediation program. So the idea is expanded mediation services to avoid eviction. So that's one-time appropriation of $300,000. Our goal will be to get that ongoing. The other one-time appropriation in this bill is pre-development grants for rural areas to help build affordable housing projects. That's one of the biggest obstacles in some of these smaller cities, is getting, whether it's inspections, engineering, a lot of those upfront costs that are hard to cover. So it's $500,000 one time, and it's for projects in the 5th and 6th class. The other thing this bill does is there's a information collection. So the county assessors, I think in these counties of the 1st and 2nd class, are going to coordinate with the metropolitan planning organizations to start doing a housing inventory. So it's required in the larger counties, and then the smaller counties may do it. But I think this will start to help us better understand what our housing stock looks like. The things that were not in the bill, that what we have heard will kind of continue conversations through the interims. Inclusionary zoning is going to be on the docket. Tying economic development or GOED dollars or economic development dollars to incentives being awarded to cities, but cities having to prove that they have enough housing stock. So that was in the bill. It was stripped out of the bill, but I think that might be something that's going to be really, it's detailed. It's detailed over. It's very complex, and so I think that might be something that the commission looks at this year. The other thing, the last bill I'll talk about is SB 217, Housing and Transit Reinvestment Zone Act. So this, wasn't only this bill is what it's trying to do is connect mass transit with denser, affordable housing and mixed use. And so it's really, the way that it's kind of discussed is it's a first step. So it's anytime that there is a front runner station, and within a development of 1/3 a mile within that that front runner station, increment you can do, if you do housing, I think it's 50%, 50 units per acre, and 10% of the housing has to be affordable. Part of that increment will go into bigger and greater developments within that area that expand there for transportation and things like that. And then the state's going to put some money in to expand transportation. So there's no direct dollars for housing, but it's an incentive program to start incentivizing denser, more affordable developments around our bigger transportation or transit areas. So with that, any questions? But those are the bills I was here to talk about. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Remarkable presentation. And Tara Rollins, you're on to give us an update on the appropriations for affordable housing.
So we had a pretty big win when it came to appropriations for affordable housing. And I'm sure everybody's read about it in the news. And so we're pretty excited to get additional funding. So the first one is we got 10 million of the appropriation will be provided for gap funding of private activity bond finance multifamily housing. And so $10 million is a lot of money for the state to be putting forward to affordable housing. Because as we know in the past, we've only received like 2.2 million every year. Additionally, we received $25 million that can be used for, wait, let me back up, sorry. So we also received $25 million. The appropriation will be matched by private dollars for preservation of rehabbing affordable housing units. And so we're looking forward to seeing how that funding will be used. And so as it indicates in the intent language, it says it intends that up to $25 million will be used for the Utah Housing Preservation Fund. And so we need to have a better understanding of what that means, up to 25 million. So hopefully we'll be getting some clarification from the state on that. And so I hope everybody's ready to put up their sleeves and start working on some housing. Because we have some funding and we need to make sure that we spend it wisely so we can continue to invest more of the state dollars in affordable housing. So thank you.
Thank you, Tara. And then on top of what we have received from the legislators this year, as we all know, a lot of federal money is coming to the state, not just for rental assistance, but to build affordable housing. Our share of the Housing National Trust Fund, it is $3 million. So it's very, very exciting, everything that's happening in Washington, D.C. Before I go to questions, I would like to give two huge shout outs to a few of our members. So the folks that are social service providers for the homelessness population, you all know who you are. We'd like to thank you for the amazing work that you put in and have House Bill, Illison's bill to be what it is today. And the other big shout is to one of our strong members, Utah League of Cities and Towns. This was a tough year for them, very tough. And all of their staff, they did an amazing work on protecting the independency of the cities to take certain decisions, but at the same time, work with legislators to have things taking place like the House Bill 82, the ADU bill. So I just want to mention you guys because it's been an incredible hard session for you. Steve Erickson has a question. Any news on the next meeting on the commission? Ashley?
I haven't heard. I haven't heard. It's either going to be April, maybe May, but I think maybe harassing a couple of people or pushing it a little bit forward, because I think the more people push, the better chance we are for having those meetings. And I will say the other thing that the commission will be doing, and I think this is good for all of your members, they are looking for topics to discuss this interim committee, in addition to the inclusionary zoning, some of the economic development ties. So if your members have suggestions about what should really be thoroughly vetted this time, reach out to the commission, whether it's Senator Andrigg, Representative Waldrop, Joel Briscoe, or any of the commission members. So I'd recommend that.
And Ashley, when do you think the special session will take place?
What we're hearing is probably May. So it'll probably be the third week of May, because the interims will start in May, and they're always the third Wednesday. Mm-hmm. So usually when they do special sessions, they align with the interim weeks. So that's my guess. Right. So they're probably, I think they're going to be discussing funding, federal funding, mm-hmm. among other things. There's a couple bills, one bill that got vetoed that will probably be brought back. So
good to know. And it's important for us, for all of our members, to be connected and to communicate with the state legislators, because basically the special session is taking place because of all of the federal money that came to Utah because of the American Relief Act. And I think building affordable housing should be a top priority for them. And we will, reach out to you individually to have those conversations. Any other questions regarding the session?
Francisca, I will add also that, to your point, there's been a lot of legislators reaching out to Dave and myself and others, talking about how we can use those funds for affordable housing. So I think there are legislators that are interested in that. So, members, reach out to your legislators and brainstorm and come up with some really great ideas, because I think there's interest out there about how we can use that money proactively for affordable housing.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. Caitlin Myers with Moab City, Tara has a question for you. She's asking, can you speak more to the 25 million appropriations for housing preservation? Does the Utah Preservation Fund plan to start working in rural areas? Any chance some of that funding will be available not through the fund? That's $1 million question for you.
It is, and I know I owe her a phone call. Well, I was just rereading, what the intent of that funding was for. And so, as I said previously, it says up to 25 million for the Utah Housing Preservation Fund. And so I think that needs to be defined by only Walker Housing Loan Board. And so I also know that the Utah Housing Preservation Fund has been looking in the rural areas to preserve natural occurring housing. So I would reach out directly to them if you have something in your area that you want to have preserved, and reach out to them directly. But hoping to get more clarification through the state on that up to $25 million.
Thank you, Tara. Any other questions? If you want to ask your question live, you can raise your hand in Zoom and you can ask your question.
I also, I just would like to point out that if you could please reach out to our federal delegates and thank them for the funding that has come to the state already and really help sustain people in their housing. I think it's important that they hear from all of us to really show that that funding was much needed. I know that our community action programs are on the front line of all of this, but I think that we all need to definitely recognize the need, and that it has done wonders in our state and is continuing to.
Well, we finished just a little bit before 11:30, which was kind of my mark for the second presentation. And because we have those extra few minutes, I would like to ask Chris and Kenwin, before they start their formal presentation, to tell us a little bit how this research started and how West Ed is working with United Way. I mean, some of us, if not all of us, know very well United Way. We just don't know so much about the organization. Kenwin.
Sure. Chris is going to talk a lot more about himself and the United Way. But I work in an organization called West Ed. It's a nonprofit national organization. We focus on healthy human development and education. So birth through post-secondary education is our primary concern. And I'm currently working on a contract with the federal U.S. Department of Education and their Institute of Education Sciences. And they fund regional educational labs across the nation. There's 10 of us, to support a region with research, evidence-based practice, technical assistance. And so our region is California, Nevada, Arizona, and Utah. And my personal work is here in Utah. And some of that work is to support and work with the United Way and their work in the region to support students and families. And then we also do some other work with the Utah State Board of Education and others. And also in our slides, there's links to our websites, but I'll also stick it in the chat if anybody wants to check out WestEd. Think that's sufficient, Francisco?
Yes, thank you, Kenwin. Chris, would you like to talk a little bit about the specific group that is working on this issue?
Certainly. I'll start the slides and we can get into that because part of that is what we were going to share at the beginning. Before I start, I just want everybody to know I'm not trying to hide myself. Well, maybe I am. I had a little very minor skin cancer treatment last week, so I'm really, really red. I kind of look like a peeled tomato, and so I'm saving you all from having to look at me. So let me get up the slides and then we'll jump into this. All right, everybody can see? Okay.
Yes.
So, Kenwin introduced herself. She's, I'm honored to be able to work with her at United Way. She's super bright and is kind of really helping me lead things on our family financial stability work. So I am what we call a network director at United Way. So I oversee several networks, both in schools and kind of around specific issues that are focused on trying to kind of create some measurable impact. United Way's focus, United Way's kind of approach to this is through what we call the Promise Partnership Regional Council. And so it's a regional approach to providing kind of healthy and stable families. And what we do is we really focused on education and schools as the centerpiece of all of this. So we are focused on 6 school districts within this Promise Partnership Regional Council: Canyons, Davis, Granite, Ogden, Park City, and Salt Lake. And that's really kind of a coalition of the willing when it comes to school districts. Those are the ones that want to work with this. And so we've taken this results-based accountability framework, which establishes a long-term kind of measurable goal that we'd like to attain. And then we build networks around those goals that are aimed at or trying to think about and develop strategies to make real measurable change in that goal. The work that Kenwin and I are doing, and several others, many of us here are doing, is around family financial stability. And we've operationalized that, not just as stability when it comes to jobs, housing, and schooling, but kind of really kind of defined the measure, if you will, as student mobility rates. And that's what we're going to really dig into today, is to kind of give you an understanding of what's going on when it comes to mobility. Because we feel that this is a really important chapter in the discussion around family financial stability and around housing stability that often might not get the voice that we think that it needs. This is kind of our roadmap to success. This is kind of the way that we like to lay out the work at United Way. So if you can see all of these various issues or various stops along the roadmap, we have regional networks around all of these. And as you can see, financially stable families is kind of underneath in that blue bar, as well as health. So it kind of underpins a lot of the work that we do, but it also is central to helping make sure that families and students are successful, because if they don't have a stable life and their family isn't stable, they cannot do well in things like 3rd grade reading and 8th grade math. So Kenwin, I'll kick it over to you to talk a little bit about mobility.
Okay. So some of this might be really obvious to a lot of you, and this might be new information. So we're kind of trying to hit a middle ground of information kind of detail levels. But what is student mobility? It's just when a student moves from one school to another. And it's when a student moves not when it's expected. So if you leave elementary school at the proper time and you enter a new school that's a junior high or a middle school, that is expected and all students are doing that. So that is not considered mobility. Mobility is when it's an unscheduled move according to like K-12 education. Why do students transfer? They transfer for so many reasons. Many are positive reasons, many are negative. Some are voluntary, some are involuntary from the family's perspective. And so it relates to this group because a lot of student moves are due to housing instability. And so that would be considered a negative move because that is not a family's choice necessarily. And it is often related to other things going on in the family that might be causing a little bit of chaos or stress at the home. And so then that kind of bleeds into the student's school life, and then moving into a new school is yet more instability. But I don't want to ignore the fact that some moves are positive. Sometimes a student finds that they are not kind of jiving with a particular school's culture, and another school might appeal to them more and might be a better fit. So they move, their family moves them on purpose. Or the family got, one of the family members gets a better job, they move to maybe a safer home. Something about that move might be good for the family. And so it might be felt and seen in a more positive light in terms of that student's life trajectory. And then there's other things like students in foster care. They're often moved when they change homes or placements. So they are disrupted in their educational setting as well. And then other negative school-based reasons can cause a student to move, such as bullying, feeling just not a part of the school community, not feeling supported by teachers, or actually getting in trouble and being expelled. Chris, I'm ready for the next slide. And I'm looking at the chat if anybody wants to put questions in there. So why do we care about student mobility? We just heard about some of the negative reasons that students move to other schools. And if we put ourselves in the mind of a student, kind of just moving to a new school can be scary. It can take a long time to resettle in terms of making friends and learning what's going on in the school and how do I get to lunch, but also academics. Not every school is tracking on the same curriculum. They're not moving at the same pace. So for the student, research shows that moving schools for really any reason has negative repercussions for their grades, their achievement, and their graduation rates. When a student moves to a new school, they often feel isolated, so their social capital has to be rebuilt. And these things often lead to their being disengaged. And so there's also a relationship with student absenteeism, which further causes challenges in their academic life. And they've tracked, not my research, but research has tracked that students who've moved multiple times in their K-12 life also have lower post-secondary attainment. So don't enroll in college at higher rates. They don't persist at the same rate. And there's later repercussions for job stability and earning potential. And then thinking about, okay, I moved one time, no big deal. It can be a big deal, but students who have to move multiple times, this compounds. It's like an exponential effect on their outcomes. And then students in poverty, if you look at two students, let's say, and each student moved twice, the students living in poverty have greater negative effects of those moves. So it's like further compounding the challenges in their life. And then if you think about the school, students churning in and out, it disrupts culture and climate. And also for teachers, it takes a lot of their energy and attention to bring students up to speed. So it causes problems for schools as well as students and families. And then coming back to this idea of financial stability and housing and why this group might want to know, it's a chicken and an egg question. Oftentimes we can say this thing kind of leads to a student not doing well in math. In this case, financial stability of the family leads to potentially housing instability, which leads to student mobility. And then we know student mobility leads to worse outcomes academically and in life outcomes. So it leads to further financial stability. So it's a cycle of challenge. So we want to jump in here with housing and supporting students and families in the schools to stop it on both ends. And also thinking about the community disruption that we see with housing instability. leads to family challenges, which leads to further community challenges. So it's all interwoven. Okay, what is student mobility? So I said it's when you move schools, but specifically, we want to talk about what it really means. So there is a difference in definitions, and I put here on this slide, it's an issue. We have inconsistent definitions of mobility across the country, within Utah, and they vary only a little, but they make a difference. So in Utah, the state education system defines it as having less than 160 days in a school. And it's interesting because we have to have 180 days of minimum school days. So even if you have 170 days in a school, that you might have actually moved. So narrowing it to 160 means we might be undercounting. Some of the data we're going to share today takes into account some other kind of like criteria that also bump up the mobility rates. So the data that my organization has analyzed, we're including summer moves. So we can imagine that a student that moves school in October is more disrupted than a student that changes over the summer. However, if you change schools multiple times in the summers, you're still having to reacclimate to a new school. So we include that in some of these data. So it's something to think about. The rate is just the percentage of the students who are identified as mobile. And then we also look at another data point, which is the average number of schools per student. So if I moved 8 times in my schooling, that's a bigger challenge than if I moved 1 time. That doesn't show up in the mobility rate. Mobility rate of a school is just, this year, this is how many, what portion of our students changed in or out of our school. What can we know? I'm going to bump this over to Chris. So he's going to talk about some actual things that we know and what we can know, and then Utah data specifically.
Right, thanks, Kenwin. Yeah, we're kind of tag teaming if you haven't noticed. So what do we know about student mobility? I'm going to walk you through some slides that give you a sense of basically what we know from the state level and what we know in some of the counties that we've been focusing on within our PPRC and within some of those school districts. We're limited a little bit by what data is available from USBE. So we're going to provide you as much as we can. We'll talk a little bit about kind of grades. We'll talk a little bit about kind of specific student groups, meaning folks or students based on race and ethnicity, English language learners, disability status, economically disadvantaged. I'm going to move through this relatively quickly so that we can kind of get to some discussion. And Francisca does have these slides, so don't hesitate if you want to follow up with us or get more information afterwards, but I don't want to dwell too much on a bunch of data. So here we go. All right, so this is Utah data. So the baseline across the state is 11.7%. I mean, that is our mobility rate for students. 11.7% of students move at some point and have that less than 160 days in one school in a year. You can look at the counties that we've focused on here, and you can see that Weber and Salt Lake counties have higher mobility rates than Summit and Davis counties. When it comes to this PPRC baseline of this region, so this districts that we've looked at that I mentioned at the beginning, that baseline is 14.6%. You can see some trend here again. Sometimes the trend actually is a little bit different based on how mobility is defined. So don't focus as much on the trend that you're seeing in these bars. Look at the mobility rate. And that kind of sets a baseline for where we are. So, and again, these are our districts that we've talked about. And you can see, again, similar to what the county showed us, Ogden City District and the Salt Lake City District have the higher mobility rates. Canyons is right behind that, then Granite, and then Davis and Park City have the lowest mobility rates. When it comes to students of color in Utah, and again, this is statewide because this is the way the data is available to us. You look at statewide, you can see African Americans Native Americans and Pacific Islanders have a higher mobility rate in Utah, and whites have the lowest mobility rate. And if you think about that statewide baseline of 11.7%, anything over that would be higher mobility, anything lower than that would be kind of lower mobility. So you can see really mobility kind of shifts and often, unfortunately, trends towards some of the other issues that we know are concentrated in communities of color. If you look at students when it comes to vulnerability categories, this is kind of a vague term that we tried to use. Students with a disability have a mobility rate at 13%. English language learners have a mobility rate at 16.8%, and those that are economically disadvantaged is at 16%. This is for the state of Utah. Again, this is the way that the data was available to us from USBE. But as you can see, folks students who are within these kinds of categories have higher mobility than those. This data is a little bit different. It's not a rate. It's the average number of schools attended in 1 year based on these categories. I thought it would be interesting to show you this. And as you can see, if you look at groups like the economically disadvantaged, which is that green in the middle, you can see the difference between the number of schools somebody who is not economically disadvantaged attends and somebody who is economically disadvantaged. And obviously you can look at the red bars and see that youth in foster care attend the most schools in 1 school year. Again, this is the way the data was available to us, but we thought it was important to kind of get a sense of what's going on with our students based on specific categories. All right, I'm going to kick it back to Kenwyn, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the districts.
With these slides, we're going to pop through. We have one for each of the districts we've been talking about. So if you want to see these slides afterwards, you can get into the numbers. We're just going to look at 2 of the districts as examples, but we wanted to bring it to more real numbers for those schools that are highly impacted. So we have here the top 10 is probably the wrong wording, but the 10 schools with the highest mobility rates per district in this Promise Partnership regions. And then looking at also the numbers. So if we look at East Midvale School, which is this top school in Canyons, this is an elementary school, and there are 526 children in this 1 year that we looked at that moved in or out of that school. So we looked at the year before the pandemic because we thought that was more typical of whatever that school is experiencing or whatever these districts are experiencing. After we created these, we actually looked at the data for this last year, 1920, and it really isn't that different. It's maybe 1 percentage point off per district. And that's likely because, well, we didn't start kind of shutting down until March, but also because of all of the great work done to hold people in their homes. Mobility might not have changed that much. So thinking about if you're in a school, 526 kids moving in or out that year is really hard to handle. And the mobility rate in that school was 52%. So this includes summer. So this is a higher rate than if you took out summer. But yet, if we think about half of the kids coming in or out in a given year, that's a really hard thing to deal with. And so if we can get together with the housing advocates and communities to reduce the churn and the chaos for students and schools, we expect to see learning improve and just everything else for a student to improve. In these charts, we also have the percentage of students in that school that are economically disadvantaged and the percentage of students in those schools that are students of color. So we can see here that these schools have pretty high percentages of both. And along the bottom, it's the average for the district. So in Canyons, 28% of kids are from families that are economically disadvantaged, but these schools have higher poverty. And then same with students of color. It's about a quarter of the students in the district, but these schools tend to have higher percentages. And I put in red anything that shows where both are over 50% in a school. So there's just a lot of overlap between all of these types of statistics we look at that show challenge for families. And then if we could pop to Salt Lake City. This shows that, as we know, Salt Lake City is pretty diverse, and these schools have even higher rates of poverty, and the mobility rates are also really challenging, so in the 30s and 40s. That's really the takeaway there. I see a question. Can students be counted more than one time? Meaning, can a student have a disability and be economically challenged? That's a great question. Yes. So the same student could show up in both of the bars that Chris was looking at before. Yeah. And Chris, I think we can go past these. Yeah, and then we want to show you some things that we can know. So this is not a live demonstration, but we have Tableau data built in so that we can look at maps. So this is what might be really interesting to the housing community as well. We can look at where schools are. Each of those dots is a school. And we can look at zip code boundaries, and we can look at school district boundaries. There's some limitations with these data so that schools and zip codes don't match perfectly. So a school might draw students from across zip code boundaries, so they don't lay perfectly on each other, but there are things that we can look at in terms of housing, poverty, lots of census data that give you an idea of what's going on in a community or neighborhood, and then relate that to a school. You can go to the next slide, Chris. Awesome. So one example of something we can look at is, this is the Canyon School District. If you can make out that blue boundary, and then all the schools are the little dots, and we can see a transfer rate. So the color indicates transfer rate. So you can really just see a couple schools that have a high rate in Canyons. If you looked at Granite, you'd have a lot more red. And then if we look at the next slide, this is showing the number of students. So for instance, if we all wanted to work together to bring extra resources to a school or community, we might look at that rate, because lots of students in terms of proportion are moving in an area. But if we want to impact the highest number of students and families, we might look at something like this. The red is where there's just greater numbers of students who have moved in or out of a school. And then I have one more map to show you what we can look at together sometime if we wanted to. This shows where students have moved from and to. And so we can actually select one of those dots and then see in the second map every place they've moved to in the state. Have they all moved in a local neighborhood? Are they sleeping on their aunt's sofa? Is it that they've moved to a completely different part of the state? Those sorts of pieces of information might help guide us to say, this might be a neighborhood we want to work in. This is a school that has local churn, which might affect the interventions that we think about bringing. So what can we know? We know some things. We don't know some things. We know some things. We know that we have higher mobility rates with impacted and vulnerable communities. That makes a ton of sense. We also know that if we include summers in our more inclusive calculation, that about 1/5 of students in our PPRC districts have moved each year. That's a lot of moving, and you all know the challenges of housing. So we're thinking we can ask certain questions that look at both school and home. And we can look at, things based on geography. And then Chris, the last thing is what we don't know. We don't know why individual families and students move. So we can say generally reasons, but we don't know at this school, why do those families move? And we also don't know what percentage of mobility is due to housing instability. So that is perhaps something we want to look at. And then one thing that we're all looking at in the next month is, can we find neighborhoods where students are moving among schools frequently? Are they sharing the same population of students and families? And maybe then we bring resources to that community specifically.
Yeah, thanks, Kimberly. So how do we do something about this, right? So once we get our hot spots, and we really try to focus on where we see high mobility amongst schools, we're going to work to reduce student mobility through kind of within the schools, through communication, through trying to kind of support schools and ease the transition. this is both a system issue, and I mean system meaning like a technical issue of the transfer of the records, but it's also how do we orient families and students to the new school, and how do we make sure that the school feels like a welcoming place and a place for them to be, to grow and to learn. And then there's also this other side of what's going on outside of the school, and how do we think about this as I said at the beginning, a new chapter in this housing field, to think about schools, students, families as a key demographic, as a key kind of group that needs services like housing stability, like eviction prevention services. And is there potentially a way to work within the schools or use the schools as a conduit to provide those kinds of services, so we can not only reduce family instability and keep people in their houses and keep families stable, but also we can have an impact on the student's life and the student's educational outcomes, not only in the immediate, but ultimately long-term, to really kind of try to stem the challenge that could happen, that could occur, and that could impact a student their entire life. So with that, in the slides, we have a few things about resources if you want those. Kenwin and I are both trained as researchers, so we're kind of goofy like that, and have all the references if they're helpful for you. And we have our contact information as well, but we want to open it up for questions and discussion.
So Kenwin, there are two questions in the Q&A, but one of them was answered to you live through your presentation, and then the other question is, have families that have moved been involved in identifying what they need to help prevent, if appropriate, these moves?
That is a great question that I don't know the answer to. I know that there are homeless liaisons in school districts that provide lots of additional supports and services to families. They connect them with services. They let the student stay in the school, and they provide transportation. So there's things that certain specialists in the school districts work on. Have families identified what could help them not move? So there's the school perspective, and then there's the housing perspective. Mm-hmm. And I know the United Way is working on the community level, at a grassroots level, to do a lot more focus groups and bringing in community member voices to talk about all of the different challenges that the United Way helps support. So I want to bring it to Chris, but I think that is one question that together the housing community and the education community could decide to try to answer more often, through surveys, through focus groups, through informal questioning, but also through formal data collection, to say, what do families need? What is it? And Chris has some ideas about bringing the housing services as well as other services into the school, like some of our districts do already, but only in limited locations usually. Granite and Davis, I know, do an awesome job at that. I'm not sure about the other school districts.
Yeah, I think to that point, Ken, when there are, in a lot of the schools we have, they're called various things, community learning centers, they have family support specialists, but they essentially have folks within the schools who are there to help target students and families who the administration sees as having challenges, whether it comes up in a counseling or therapy session with the student, or whether a parent is calling. And so, there are ways to leverage those resources. Some of these even have centers and facilities, places where people can go. Sometimes there are ESL classes in the evenings for parents, things like that. So we're thinking about ways to leverage those within the schools to provide information and resources. And, for the past 6 months, we've been really trying to push that, or I've been really trying to push that within the schools that I've been working with, and in the schools that my colleagues are working with. So, information, flyers, all sorts of things that we're trying to push through. And we're trying to think of a more concrete way to do that as we move forward. So maybe we target a school, and we don't just provide supports to help them with the transition and work with the school administration on engaging new families and new students in their school, but we also provide resources if there's a way, in a real concrete way. Maybe there's a housing counselor that sits in the in the school for a few hours, one day a week, and we can refer them. So things like that. I don't want to talk too much because I know we're getting at time, but we have a lot of ideas, but we're also welcome and open to more if you have any.
Chris, thank you so much. Kenwin, same. This is so good to hear. And, you know, what I'm thinking right now, it's all of the partnerships that can be created. I don't know if anyone from Salt Lake County is on the meeting today, but Salt Lake County, we're going to announce soon the recipients of a grant to provide outreach and education within Salt Lake County for rental assistance. And the data that you have, it can be very useful for multiple partners. So we're looking forward to be working with you. And I'm going to share this presentation with all of the people that have registered. I want to ask if anyone has additional questions for Kenwin or Chris. And if you want to ask your question live, please just raise your hand and I will have you ask it. I'm sure that most of you are just digesting the information because this is what I did when I first watched it, you know, a few weeks ago. It's excellent, you know, research done, and it parallels all the other research that was done on evictions and rental assistance across the state. So we have one person who has a live question. James, go ahead and ask your question.
Oh yeah, so I just happen to have both of my children go to East Midvale Middle School. Well, one has now gone to Midvale Middle, but I was just wondering if you had any data or on the effects that it has on children that don't move. I mean, I know you had mentioned it in the school or whatnot,
Yeah.
but just a concerned parent question.
Yes. So there is evidence that shows that students in schools with high mobility underperform what they would be expected to be doing. So it has a negative effect on the other students as well. But it's not, I wouldn't say that the data are so severe or consistent that if I were a parent in a school like that, I would be that concerned. But there is a small effect. And we also know that in schools with students who are behind academically, who are English learners and who have other challenges, it helps them to have more of the high performing, stable, and fortunate students in that school. So it is also a wonderful community. It's good for the community to have all kinds of students in a school, including those that are more fortunate. So it's like, that's what I know from the research on both sides. Do you have more? Did I answer your question, James?
Yes, thank you. I guess my concern was more socially, as they're doing academically well, but they seem to have a lot of friends moving away. So it just kind of hit close to home. Thank you.
Yeah, that can be really sad.
Yeah.
I think it's a really wonderful thing when I've seen schools that have welcoming practices and also goodbye ceremonies for students that come and go, no matter how frequent that is. That can really help students. I'm also like a social worker. It can really help students process, even if you're sad to lose friends, to have that be noticed and recognized and supported by school staff is a nice thing. It helps.
James, thank you so much for bringing that point. That's such an excellent point. And, you know, it totally makes sense, your question, but, you know, you're a parent, so you thought about it right away. And to me, this is like, hey, this is an opportunity to do something, to work together. So there's a question in Q&A. Do you have plans to try to find more data on which percentages are due to housing instability, affordability?
Yeah, I guess one of the things that we're trying to do right now, United Way is trying to do, is a small kind of targeted study to talk to folks about what causes family financial stability and kind of the impacts that it has. So that's one way. It's more of a qualitative sort of assessment or study. but we're trying to kind of dig a little bit to understand where this fits within the larger context of a family struggling with financial stability.
Yeah.
Yeah, so studies have been done in other places, but it's irrelevant to like a particular school or neighborhood. And it would be awesome if we could collect more information, but also there's a matter of privacy with families. So, you know, including like a standard survey or data collection form at a school when someone is unenrolling or enrolling about why they moved would be wonderful for us to understand, and a challenge, especially in Utah. We have a lot of, we prioritize privacy and confidentiality. So there's a balance. But any ideas that anyone has or resources to do more of what Chris is talking about, focus groups, you know, casual conversation, but also like high quality data collection would be really cool.
Yeah. Well, I would like to thank everyone for presenting and attending and asking questions. What I would like to leave you with and, you know, think about within your own organization is that we have federal money in the state and more to come at unprecedented levels. We have rental assistance, a lot. And we're going to have mortgage assistance, and we're going to have additional programs. Another key component of the American Relief Act is the tax credit for the for children. And everybody is saying this is a game changer. Researchers are predicting that 50% of the kids living in poverty will be lifted up. So Kenwin and Chris, the challenge for you will be to look at this kind of data the next few months and in a year to see what kind of effect this will have on student mobility. I have assumptions that will be positive, but to actually see the data will be amazing. So I would like to thank you again, and we will be in touch. I will share the slides with all of the people that registered, and thank you again, and have a wonderful Wednesday. Goodbye, everybody. One new message. Oh, thank you.